Hi everyone, thank you for your interest in this presentation titled Development and Validation of the Perceived Crisis Readiness Skill. My name is Sheryl. I'm a lecturer from the Singapore University of Social Sciences, Public Safety and Security program. This is what I'll be covering in my sharing. I'll give a background of the crisis readiness construct, followed by aims of study. Next, I'll be presenting Study 1A, which focuses on the development and calibration of the perceived crisis readiness skill. Study 2 focuses on confirmatory factor analysis, and Study 1B looks at how factors such as attitudes, subjective norms, perceived behavior control are related to intention to pick up crisis management skills as well as crisis readiness. This presentation will end with a discussion on the implications of the study. Modern crises are different from conventional crises, given that they are more complex, dynamic, and have cascading effects due to the transboundary nature. Crises are considered to be transboundary when they transcend across geographical boundaries, where they have repercussions on multiple cities, regions, countries, or continents. And we see that during the COVID-19 pandemic. For functional boundaries, with the Great East Japan earthquake, is an example of how it is more than just a natural hazard that resulted in the disasters, and it's not about just the immediate emergency responses, but it also induced flow of radiation, resulting in a drop in the tourism rate, and also disrupted international trade and global supply chain. Modern crises they are not one-off single episodes. There's no clear starting and ending point, so crises can persist over time, or rather the impact can linger and countries may take time to recover. Often before it is resolved, another crisis may happen, and this is what we term as compounding crisis. Compounding crisis is complex as they can be resulted from multiple causes and has unknown solutions, and it requires system-wide responses to address some of the inadequacies. Being crisis ready involves both emotional and cognitive readiness with respect to coping with the unpredictability and as well as fluctuations during a crisis. Crisis readiness is found to be associated with psychological resilience, and having this crisis readiness mentality builds resilience and helps individuals to be better prepared for disruptions, able to recover from shocks, develop psychological immunity to environmental stressors or day-to-day hassles, as well as able to help individuals to adapt and grow. By being crisis ready, individuals can stay ahead of future events and able to mitigate some of the adverse impacts. On the other hand, the lack of crisis readiness may necessitate last-minute contingency plans, and organizations may need to restructure to meet the needs of the situation. This was an expansion of a past study conducted to have an overview of the level of crisis readiness Singaporeans have. The aim of this research is to develop and validate a new skill to measure perceived crisis readiness, as well as to examine the relationship among crisis readiness, attitudes towards crisis management, subjective norms, perceived behavioral control, and intention to be equipped with crisis management skills. A literature review was first conducted on crisis readiness construct, and based on the literature review, 6 factors were identified, which includes perceived possibility of crisis, preparation for crisis, reaction to surprise elements, emotional reaction, cognitive processes, and coping abilities. Interviews were conducted with subject matter experts to examine if the 6 factors were relevant and accurately identified. So based on the 6 factors, 28 items were drafted. Convenient sampling and snowball sampling were used to gather participation for the study. Participants were first presented with various national crises that happened in Singapore previously, and they would indicate their response on the perceived crisis readiness skill. A preliminary analysis was conducted before exploratory factor analysis was conducted using M+ software. Mahalanobis distance was used to identify multivariate outliers, and we usually will remove multivariate outliers with p-value of less than 0.001, and in this case, 14 multivariate outliers were removed, resulting in 189 cases. Majority of our participants were female, Chinese, and the mean age is 23 years old. 3 items were removed based on corrected item total correlation that falls below the cutoff value of 0.30. This left us with 25 items for analysis. To assume normal distribution, we have to see whether the skewness value and kurtosis value falls within plus minus 3 and plus minus 10 for kurtosis. Parallel analysis was conducted to determine the maximum number of factors we could extract. And usually when actual eigenvalue is more than the expected eigenvalue, the factor is considered to be significant. So parallel analysis was conducted and the maximum of 3 factors was found for perceived crisis readiness scale. Maximum likelihood was used to estimate the factor loading and is considered to be the most appropriate procedure to analyze whether data are normally distributed. It was anticipated that the factors are correlated, and that's why we use oblique rotation PROMAX to improve the interpretability of the factors. So for items that falls within this criteria, in terms of like commonality lower than 0.20, the standardized factor loading of 0.32 with 2 or more factors, and if they have standardized factor loading of lower than 0.50, they will be removed. So this table reveals the exploratory factor analysis, goodness of fit from 1 to 3. We use various fit indices. Chi-square test statistics usually are sensitive to large sample size. So we also use RMSEA and SRMR. So the 3 factors seems to be a better fit, but looking at the standardized loading, we found that many of the items were overlapped with the other factors. Therefore, a 2-factor model is considered to be better. This is the EFA results, and we can see that the standardized factor loading was considered to be good with good commonalities, and the last item was removed as the standardized factor loading was below 0.5. The perceived crisis readiness scale involves 24 items, 2 factors. One is crisis response, which measures an individual's ability to manage and cope with dealing with crisis. This involves deploying resources, managing their emotions, cognitive ability to process, and to make decisions rationally. The second factor is crisis prevention, which means having this mindset and foresight to identify all possible crises and to prevent them from occurring. Both subscales have good internal reliability as well as split half reliability. For study 2, I tried to replicate the factor structures found in study 1A. So in this study, convenience and snowball sampling was used to recruit 239 participants were involved, and we also examined the goodness of fit. So again, we removed the multivariate outliers, and we have a total of 230 cases. So there were 3 models that were considered. The first model is when all the items are loaded into one general factor. Second model is a replication of the results we found in EFA. And third model is a higher order construct, which includes crisis response and crisis prevention dimension. So usually for fit indices, models with RMSEA and SRMR value of less than 0.08 are considered to be acceptable model fit. I also considered AIC, and also CFI for model comparison. So models with lower AIC values is more preferred, and models with CFI values closer to 1 indicated better fit. So I fitted both a single common factor model as well as a 2 first order factor model. You can see that the 2 first order factor model is considered to be a better model as compared to a single common factor model. I was not able to fit the items to a second higher order model. So this diagram shows the standardized factor loading for each factors. So based on study 2, we were able to confirm that there is a 2-factor model for perceived crisis readiness scale. So in study 1B, the focus is on theory of planned behavior. It's looking at how intention is a direct predictor of behavior and how this intention is influenced by attitudes toward the behavior, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. The theory of planned behavior has been used widely to predict behaviors such as smoking, voting decisions, and losing weight. So intention is a measurement of individuals' intent to engage in a behavior at a specific time and place. Attitudes towards behavior refers to whether is it a positive or negative evaluation of the behavior, and it depends on the beliefs of the consequences attributed to the behavior. Subjective norms refers to social pressure to perform or not to perform the behavior, and also depends on the approval or disapproval of individuals or groups. Perceived behavior control refers to the perception of controllability over the behavior or the ease or difficulty in engaging in the behavior. So it is very similar to the concept of self-efficacy. So applying the theory of planned behavior to crisis management, we developed a questionnaire to assess theory of planned behavior in crisis management. So for attitudes, it's about how they have a favorable or unfavorable stance towards the importance of crisis management skills. For subjective norms, it's about how they evaluate the opinions of others and how it influences individuals' perceptions towards crisis management skills. For behavior control, it's evaluating their self-efficacy or the perceived confidence they have in managing a crisis. For intention, it's whether they have the intention to equip themselves with crisis management skills. So based on past research using theory of planned behavior, I hypothesized the following: that attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control will have positive relationship with intention to equip with crisis management skills, as well as crisis prevention and crisis response. So first, CFA was conducted for all skills. Overall, the internal consistencies were good with adequate goodness of fit. So due to the large number of variables included, I created passes for each construct so that we need the rule of thumb that the sample size has to be at least 10 observations per parameters. So a model was constructed with all the item passes loaded on a single common factor. This model generated poor fit, meaning that the common method bias is not a threat to this study. Next, I constructed a measurement model where the individual passes loaded on their respective latent constructs. And the purpose of examining this model is to investigate the factor structure for the latent construct. Overall, it has 8 first-order latent factors with a good fit in our data. After establishing the good fit, I examined the structural model. So the structural model was also a good fit. You can see that RMSEA was about 0.084 and SRMR was about 0.041. So this figure represents the path coefficient of the structural model. Overall, attitudes towards crisis management was found to have both significant positive relationship with intention as well as crisis prevention, but not on crisis response. Social norm has a significant positive relationship with intention, but a significant negative relationship with crisis prevention. Self-efficacy was found to have significant positive relationship with intention, perceived crisis response, and crisis prevention. I also suspected that there may be gender differences, so I looked at the model fitted for both males and females. For males, similar to the earlier model, attitudes towards crisis management was found to have both significant positive relationship with intention and crisis prevention, but not on crisis response. Subjective norms also had a significant positive relationship with intention, but a significant negative relationship to both crisis response and crisis prevention. Similar to the previous model, perceived behavioral control found to have significant positive relationship with intention and perceived crisis response and crisis prevention. Interestingly, the path coefficient for the females were different. Path coefficient was largely similar to the path coefficient for the males, except that social norms did not play a negative relationship with crisis response and crisis prevention. Perceived behavioral control was found to only influence crisis response and not with intention and not with crisis prevention. So as a discussion, this study reviews a 2-factor model for crisis readiness, crisis response, and crisis prevention. Similar to past study, it was found that attitudes towards crisis management, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control plays a positive role in influencing the intention to be equipped with crisis management skills. In addition, it was found that attitudes towards crisis management and perceived behavioral control is positively related to crisis readiness in terms of crisis prevention, while subjective norms has a negative relationship with crisis prevention. One of the explanations could be that items measuring subjective norms focus on opinions of others on crisis management. This further emphasized that crisis management and crisis preventions are different. It was also found that when individuals are more confident in their ability to deal with a crisis, they perceive themselves to have better cognitive abilities, able to manage the crisis rationally when they have lower confidence. Gender differences was found, so we can see that to build crisis readiness for men, focus could be invested in crisis management training and practices to increase their perceived behavioral control. For women, while perceived behavioral control plays a part in influencing their crisis readiness, their attitudes towards crisis management plays a more important role and can further improve their perceived crisis prevention. So future studies may further explore women's attitudes towards crisis management, their perception of their role and responsibility, as well as the barriers that they observe in managing a crisis. Findings may help to refine a more targeted messages to women and men in terms of managing a crisis. We need to empower more women to take up crisis management roles, because in times of crisis, men may be caught due to conscription, and women may need to take up decisive roles in managing the crisis. So although the skill was developed by having participants read through the different crises that have happened in Singapore, I believe that the skill can be used out of Singapore context. Reason is because perceived crisis readiness items were developed based on the literature review of the behaviors that are indicative of crisis preparedness, crisis response, and crisis prevention. Future studies may also examine how crisis readiness may differ across cultures, across different types of crisis, whether it's a conventional crisis, intractable crisis, compounding crisis, or slow burning crisis, to name a few. So with that, I end my presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email and I'll be happy to address them. Thank you.